Hello everyone. Some time ago I made a video, or I attempted to make a video, on the subject of my lead mountain. It turned into a huge project because my lead mountain is vast. I spent, if I remember rightly, I spent about 8 hours filming everything that I had unpainted in the way of war games figures and models and so on, terrain. And when I came to edit it all together, the video itself was getting on for 3 hours long, and I just abandoned the idea of uploading it to YouTube. For a number of reasons. Well, one was that it was far in excess of the time that anyone would sit down and view a video on YouTube, but I also had a very poor internet connection, and it would have taken me weeks, literally weeks, to upload that video, and I just decided it wasn't worthy of attention. It wasn't interesting enough. But then about a year later, I decided to play around with the footage a little bit, and I sped the whole thing up. Can't remember exactly how long, but I just ran it with some background music rather than my commentary, and put it up for a bit of fun. I think it condensed it all into about 20 minutes. And I was surprised to discover that, in fact, quite a lot of my viewers and subscribers found it interesting. And a couple of things have happened since then. One is that I've improved my internet connection, so it's a lot easier for me to upload videos now. What I don't want to happen is for me to just start to put up a lot of rubbish, really, just for the sake of it. But because people did seem to be interested in seeing what I had unpainted and collected over the years, I thought I would have another go at doing something along the same lines. Also, some of one person in particular has actually commented on the previous video that I put up. Could I reproduce it or put it up at the normal speed now that I had a better internet connection? It's not worth doing in that respect, partly because it's so out of date now. A lot of what I showed on that previous video I have now got painted, or I've given away, or whatever. So it's outdated. It's not worth repeating that previous video. But I did think it was worth, as I say, worth revisiting the subject. And coincidentally, one of the things that provoked that very first video was Von Kettering and Fraser had a little series of videos that he described as his covered clear out, and other people were producing videos on the subject of their shelves of shame, and that topic has re-emerged on YouTube now. Fraser's got back into painting up some of his unpainted stuff. So it all came together at the same moment. So what I thought I would do, anyway, stop waffling, is rather than produce a really long video again, I will break it down and just have an intermittent series. I'm not going to make it a separate playlist. It'll be in my wargaming playlist, but just to have an occasional episodic series of videos on the subject of my lead mountain, each one being about half an hour long, and I can go through a box at a time. This is one box that you're looking at here that I keep my unpainted soldiers and figures in. It's one of many, and I also have a lot of other items scattered about in cardboard boxes and things. But just to go through one at a time, I've chosen this one at random, and just to talk to you about what I've got in here, and broaden it out into almost like a diary of what's going on my channel, in my life and things as I go. Any subject really that comes up. So it's a sort of it'll be a kind of focus for conversation in a way. Anyway, so let's get going. One thing that subject that I thought would be a suitable subject for discussion at the very beginning of this series is why, as war gamers, and why I, as in particular, do hoard figures. Why do we buy so much and never get around to painting it? For me, there's a whole range of reasons. One of them, I think we have to admit, we have to confess really, to the addiction of purchasing figures. There is a sort of thrill to ordering them, to anticipating their arrival, to the postman dropping them through your letterbox, and the fun of unpacking them and going through them. And that often leads to us buying far more than we can possibly paint or need. But there is a joy in itself in planning these long-term projects, to thinking about what we want to do in the next sort of year or so, the subjects that interest us, the games that have grabbed our attention. I'm primarily a historical war gamer, but I have delved into games such as War Machine and Dystopian Wars and so on in the past. I'm not a purist in that respect, but I do think when you move out of the historical sphere, there is that added element of the manufacturers and the producers of games and figures playing on that addictive susceptibility of wargamers, that they sort of hype their product, they market it in such a way that it does make you want the products even more. So it is playing on those susceptibilities and those weaknesses that wargamers have. But it's just as true as historical games. Here in this particular box you can see I've got a whole host of 1/3000th Nav War models that I've never got round to painting. They're all, by the look of it, World War II. I think at the time, there's some, I think these are GHQ, they're not Nav War. Yeah, GHQ. These are 1/2400 scale model planes and so on. But I think at the time, oh no, there's some World War I here as well. I just really went for it, didn't I? At the time I was, I still am really into naval wargaming, and I had plans for all kinds of things. These particular buildings here, I think I was planning to do some kind of Battle of Midway campaign, and I wanted some buildings to place on an island, And the planes, yeah, I've got lots of B-17s and medium bombers, loads of them, B-17s, B-17s, B-17s. Yeah, I think I was planning to replicate some kind of raid on Midway and then the carrier battles and so on. I have got the carriers painted up, but I've also got a lot of figures here for looks like Graf Spey's Far East Squadron from World War One, the Leipzig, the Nuremberg, the Emden. So that's interesting. Ah, right, hang on. Yeah, these figures here, Leipzig, Nuremberg and Emden, are the replacements, or another, the sort of, what's the word, like secondary ships that were named Leipzig, Nuremberg and Emden. These were built in the 1930s and 20s. So I've got those for the sort of Second World War German Navy, but these ones here, the Nuremberg and ×2, are actually World War One. These are the ones, the Graf Spey's squadron. Königsberg and Stettin, yeah, Königsberg, part of Graf Spey's squadron, but it broke off and ended up in a kind of epic story, hiding in the Rufiji Delta in East Africa. Not really a kind of a scenario you can replay at that scale. I mean, look at the size of the ship, and yet it was a single ship hiding away. It makes a really interesting game though, but I think you need a bigger scale than that. World War II U-boats. I'm really getting back into naval wargaming at the moment, partly inspired by a channel which you may be familiar with already if you're into naval wargaming yourself. I discovered it about, I don't know, 6 months or so ago. It's called Drakenfell, and the chap who does it is very knowledgeable and erudite presenter. He switched. I think I had come across his channel some time ago. For some reason, he used to put up sort of 5-minute videos on the subject of a particular ship, very well researched and well explained, but he used that kind of robotic sort of voiceover software. I don't quite know how you do it, but it was basically a robotic voice reading his script, and it put me off watching them and listening to them. I can't sort of take in non-human voices. Don't like listening to them. So I stopped, and then only recently, I think in the last 9 months or so, he switched over to speaking on his videos, and he should have done it a lot earlier, because he's got a very nice sort of pleasing voice, and he doesn't falter, and he doesn't get off the point, and they're really worth listening to, his sort of little mini lectures and so on. And in the last month or two, he's started doing a question and answer series, which I look forward to. That goes up each weekend, and it goes on for about half an hour to 40 minutes. And he covers, his range of knowledge is enormous, and it's a really good channel. Anyway, so this has already been going on for 15 minutes, and I wanted to make each one half an hour, and I haven't even got through the first cardboard box. So let's put these all on one side for a minute. Yeah, I've got all these things sitting in my cupboards and attic and so on, and I will, I will get round to painting them one day. I'm never going to throw anything out. One of the other reasons why I, in particular, have such a big hoard is that I retired. I took early retirement about 8 years ago nearly now. It's coming up to the 8th anniversary of my retirement, and all my life, or particularly since about the age of 30, I was intent on getting away from my job as soon as possible. I used to work as a radiographer in a hospital, and when I moved down to Plymouth in the late 1980s and joined the X-ray department at Derriford Hospital here, there was a chap in his mid-50s who I really had a lot of time for in the department, and he had very similar attitudes to life and to work as I did, and he retired after about a year that I'd been there. And even then, when I was in my sort of mid to late 30s, I just said to myself, that is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to let this place wear me down. I don't know how health workers and the people who work in the NHS of the future are going to be able to cope with the increasing retirement age. I couldn't cope with it in my mid-50s, and to think that males will have to work until their 70s in the foreseeable future, staying up all night, working 24-hour shifts sometimes, it just can't be done. And so I knew that, I recognised that many years ago, and I planned to retire early that long ago. But while I could afford to purchase figures, so I knew my income would be drastically reduced, I would buy up anything and everything that I liked the look of, in anticipation of my present circumstances, that I would be sitting here with not very much in the way of an income and desiring all these models and so on. The irony being that I've now got far more than I'll ever be able to get through in my life. Right, this box here, as you can see, is full of odds and sods from the American Civil War, 15mm American Civil War. They're mainly Old Glory figures that I've never got around to painting. And these ones are Confederate cavalry. I had ambitions to paint something like Quantrell's Raid. Always enjoyed a DVD film called Ride with the Devil. If you haven't seen it, really worth watching. Fantastic cinematography. There's a lot of old Freikorps figures in here as well. These are sailors, American Civil War era though. These are Old Glory's skirmish set. Lots of figures kind of intertwined in melee. So Confederates and Union soldiers on the same casting. So a little bit difficult to put into onto a base and war game with them, but they make good markers and things like that. Just tons and tons of. I think these I bought in the early 1980s when I first started wargaming 15mm ACW, and I was living down in Thanet, and we were experimenting and purchasing various ranges to see what we would go with, and in the end we decided on Freikorps. But these are Naismith, which I think are still available, but they're a little bit clunky. Not quite so keen on them. And masses and masses of God knows what. Command packs, dismounted Confederate cavalry, markers, ammunition boxes, more sailors, pontoons. I think at the time I was thinking of trying to model the pontoon bridge over the river at Fredericksburg. So wargame that battle. Never got round to it. Lots more ammunition boxes, more pontoons, another pontoon. Oh, these are quite interesting. I think these are the these are Freikorps, and Freikorps are a really good range if you're interested in the early American Civil War and the early uniforms and outfits. And I think, even with my glasses on, my eyesight's getting so poor I can't see these things so well now, but I think this is the New Hampshire regiment with the sort of scuttle helmet. The uniform, even though they were on the side of the Union, I think their uniforms were grey. At the beginning of the Civil War, there were a lot of grey uniforms on the Union side, and some dark blue uniforms on the Confederate side. But Freikorps have got lots of figures in Havelock, with Havelocks and with the sort of different uniform type. I know I have painted up one of their Pennsylvania regiments that had the shakos that had been purchased from the French army. These are engineers with shovels and spades and so on, pickaxes. All sitting there waiting. I will probably say this with every box that we look at. I will get around to painting them one day. My interests sort of wander and meander. This is another problem with wargamers, and another reason why we end up with these things, that we have a sort of butterfly interest, and we skip from one interest to another long before we've completed an earlier project. And then, like these figures, they just sit in a box somewhere waiting for your interest to revive. And I know it will one day, but this is not that day. As Guy said in Lord of the Rings, loads of artillery here, masses of it. Just looking at these things revives your kind of incentive to get out and paint them, but at the moment I think I've got about 4 or 5 projects on my worktop. I mean, the Crimean War is definitely the thing that I am persisting at, and here, that's going to be on my benchtop. Oh, more American Civil War. But I've also got other things like my naval interest, as I say, has revived. I'm painting some Jacobites, Highlanders. I'm painting some more Zulus. I just physically haven't got the room to put these things on my desk and get back to them. So this, you forget how much you have. And for some reason, this is mainly American Civil War. Lots more Freikorps figures in here. Lovely command figures, really nice. Really want to paint them as soon as I see them. These are personalities. Can't remember exactly who. I think Grant is in here, and maybe might be Sheridan and Sherman, I'm not sure. But look what else I found in the wrong box is some figures for 28mm figures for the Russo-Japanese War, or rather, well, these ones certainly are. I don't know what they're doing in here, because I have got I might keep them out and try and put them back in their appropriate place. These figures here, I did, in the end I went for painting the Russo-Japanese War, or for wargaming it in 15mm, but I was sorely tempted to do it in 28, and there weren't that many figures, the range of availability wasn't around. But this gives you another example of my reasons for hoarding, that these figures are really nice. They are Japanese infantry in 28mm, and they were produced by a company called Falcon, who no longer exist. Now, there is a company called Falcon out there. They're not related in any way. This company had some really nice models for the Russo-Japanese War. They also had some nice figures for the Italian invasion of Ethiopia in the 1890s, and I got into that as well. But half the reason that I collect things is that if you didn't buy the figures at the time, you would never, by the time you got round to wanting to paint them, they wouldn't be available. I mean, just look at that figure. I just think it's so lovely, and yet not commercially available anymore. And when, not if, when I get round to wargaming the Russo-Japanese War in 28mm, I've got it there ready to go, ready to paint up. And also in here, you notice I bought some, these are still available. So these are Old Glory Japanese infantry. So I purchased them intending to use them for the Russo-Japanese War, but these are actually in their range for the Boxer Rebellion, which took place 3 years before the Russo-Japanese War. But it's the same uniform, same sort of more or less the same theatre of war. Both wars took place on Chinese territory. But I might, this is the trouble. You get disorganised as well, and things end up in the wrong bags when you just pack them away for future use. Right, now this is going to be a chaotic series, because I've now gone on to 28 minutes, only halfway through. I'm conscious that my camera will continue to film when I get to 30 minutes, but when I come to edit it, the soundtrack will be interrupted. So I'm just going to stop recording for a second and then start the recording again, because I want to get through this box in one episode. Right, there we are. So you shouldn't notice any break in transmission. So in this box I have also got two old tins, Christmas biscuit collections. On the label on here, I'm not sure if it's still relevant, but it's got Plains Indians, War Games Foundry Medievals, and Old Glory Mongols. So I think over the years that's changed. It looks as though all I've got in here are Mongols. These are from Old Glory. Nice figures. I think I've said in a previous video on the subject of my Mongol army that I have painted up, that they're a little bit curious in that the range is called Mongols in Europe, and yet they have in their range, they have a lot of Korean and Chinese auxiliaries that I'm sure never set foot in Europe. But just look at the hordes of unpainted Mongols that I've got. Oh, there are some medievals in here as well. On the bottom. Oh, here are the Indians, I think, because I've actually stapled onto it a note of some painting guides that were in War Games Illustrated, number 113 and 116. Gives you an idea how long ago I purchased these. Yeah, on that subject, that's taking me on a little diversion, but I might as well keep going and make this much longer. I did put up a video some time ago about my wargaming magazines and my huge... It's back to this thing about hoarding again. I no longer subscribe to any wargaming magazines, so I've managed to drop that addiction, kick the habit, as it were. What happened was that when was it? It was this year sometime. There was a sort of an EU what's the word? Like an EU edict that every internet contact had to be reaffirmed, as it were. So I started getting... I'm hesitating because I can't remember the terminology for all this. It was to do with security, safety, databases, all that kind of thing. But I started getting emails from War Games Illustrated asking me to reaffirm my desire to be sent emails from them, and I wasn't interested in getting emails for them any longer. I should have unsubscribed from their email list long before, but I thought, well, that was a handy opportunity to drop the emails. So I didn't respond, and they sent me a reminder, and I didn't respond, and they sent me a reminder, and I didn't respond. And when it got to the cut-off weekend, I got something like 40, I'm not joking, 40 emails from them saying, please reaffirm your subscription, not the subscription for the magazine, for the subscription for the email letters, before the weekend, otherwise we won't trouble you any longer. And the troubling went on. I got about another 20 the week after the cut-off date, when they weren't supposed to even get in touch with me. And this bugged me so much that I went onto my online banking account and I unsubscribed from War Games Illustrated, or so I thought, because I continued, after what I thought was the end of my subscription in August, to keep getting magazines from them each month. So I got in touch with them and they said, oh, your subscription doesn't run out until the end of October. And when I looked, I had unsubscribed accidentally from Miniature Wargaming rather than from War Games Illustrated. So I thought, well, I've done it now. I've got cupboards full, my cupboards are bulging with unread magazines, just as my cupboards are bulging with unpainted miniatures. So I won't bother to subscribe to Miniature Wargames. And then coincidentally at the same time, my subscription for Wargames Soldiers and Strategy came up, and I just let that drop as well. I'd sort of purified myself of the addiction to wargaming magazines. So I no longer subscribe to any magazines, so I've solved that problem. But as you can see, I'm still buying Wargames figures now. Right, these are the medievals. Oh look, you see, this is another example. Wargames Foundry often send you freebies, and then you don't know where to put them or what to do with them. This is quite a nice figure. Looks like it's from the, well, definitely from the 18th century. Probably sort of Malburian period, I don't know. And got lots of, this is in the old days when War Games Foundry figures. These are quite nice medievals. My medievals, I've got loads of unpainted medievals, but they're just dotted around all over the place. But this is in the days when there used to be on a kind of slaughter bases. So these are the bases for them. I think you can still get these castings, but they're cast onto a base nowadays. This order is dated 22nd of January 1998, because I've still left the label in there, and I spent £100, not on these Old Glory. This is on medieval figures. I just couldn't afford to do that nowadays. He looks like he's a sort of crossbowman, separate arms. But nice figures nonetheless, well worth painting up, and I will do one day. Right, so let's put these back in the tin. Oh, hang on, I can keep the Russo-Japanese war out, wouldn't I? Try and eventually find the appropriate place for them. I mean, as I say, this is going to turn into a kind of intermittent, occasional series, so I will get around to opening another box up for you on a future video. But the final thing in this storage box is another tin of Christmas biscuits containing, it says on the front, Old Glory Wars of the Roses. Oh, and in fact, in here I've not only put Old Glory Wars of the Roses, I've put some front rank Wars of the Roses, so really keen on this period. Haven't got around to painting any in a long time, but this is some kind of culverin with crew, and I don't know whether there's another pack in there as well, not sure. Then lots of their bags of figures, militia longbowmen. Spent £111, and this is at my old address. So this is 1997 I purchased these. These are front rank, beautiful figures. These I have got some painted figures of these, but they are really nice front rank Wars of the Roses. I think much better than Old Glory, but Old Glory are a lot cheaper. Longbowmen in livery coats. Mounted hobblars, medieval personalities, Warwick the Kingmaker, this is front rank, Richard III and Standard Bearer. Oh, I so want to just put a brush to these as soon as I touch them and pick them up. They're just such nice figures. No time at the moment. Wounded, which I always try and paint. I have got that Wounded already painted up for the Wars of the Roses. I think, oh, have I? I haven't, you know. I've got a lot of Wounded painted up for the 100 Years' War. Militia Billmen, Archer's Stakes. I mean, I've probably got about 2 armies just in Wounded, more Wounded. Dismounted Command from Old Glory. These look like little bucklers, I think you'd call them, I don't know. Mounted Casualty. Hang on, what's I say? Mounted Command personalities. And then a few bags of odds and sods. I think these are Hinchcliffe. Yeah, I think so. Oh no, who was that? I have painted some of those figures in the past, but I cannot for the life of me remember the range. But I have painted some of those up, I recognise that. Right, and that's it. That's the bottom of my first box of my lead mounting. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, believe me. I've got loads of these things cluttering my house up. I haven't got a War Games room, I've got a War Games house. And my cupboards, drawers, attic, they're everywhere. But that's enough for one day, one video. More than enough. It's probably going to be about 45 minutes. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. See you on the next video, and if you enjoy watching this sort of thing, then I'll carry on with another episode in a week or two. Bye for now.